In 1976, a movie was released that would change cinema forever. But here's what most people don't know. Taxi Driver should never have existed. A suicidal screenwriter living in his car. A young director on the verge of collapse. A studio that wanted nothing to do with it. A leading man they tried to replace. A child actress whose parents almost pulled her from the set. An ending so violent they threatened it with an X rating. At every single turn, Taxi Driver faced obstacles that should have killed it. The fact that you can watch this film today is nothing short of a miracle. This is the story of how one of the greatest films ever made almost didn't get made at all. Let's start with Paul Schrader, because without understanding where this script came from, you can't understand why it was impossible to sell. In 1972, Paul Schrader was 26 years old and his life was falling apart.
A number of things had fallen apart in my life. I was in debt, I wasn't making any money, marriage had fallen apart.
He'd just gone through a painful divorce, he was drinking heavily, he was so broke he was living in his car. One night, he ended up in a hospital emergency room with a stomach ulcer. As he sat there, watching the doctors and nurses move around him, completely alone, he had a realization. He hadn't spoken to a single person in over 2 weeks. Not one conversation. Not one human connection. That moment of recognition, of understanding just how isolated he'd become, terrified him.
Out of this funk emerged this notion of the cab driver, the taxi driver. Someone who seemed to be surrounded by people but who was completely alone.
And from that terror came Travis Bickle. This wasn't a screenplay written for commercial success. This was a man trying to save his own life by putting his darkness on paper. And that darkness was exactly the problem. The script for Taxi Driver was unlike anything Hollywood had seen. Schrader's agent started sending it around, and the responses were not encouraging.
And everyone said, gee, this is really a good script, somebody should make it, but of course not us.
Studio after studio passed. They didn't know what to do with it. Was it a character study? A thriller? A social commentary? Why would audiences want to spend 2 hours with someone this unpleasant? Where's the commercial appeal? Even the producers who liked the writing couldn't figure out how to sell it to a studio. This was 1972, the same year The Godfather came out. Studios wanted gangster epics, disaster films, and crowd pleasers. They didn't want a movie about a lonely cab driver going insane. The script sat in development hell for nearly 2 years.
Taxi Driver was a film that when I read the script, I really felt that it was something I had to make.
In 1973, a young director named Martin Scorsese read Schrader's screenplay, and he saw something everyone else had missed. It was a masterpiece. But here's the problem. Scorsese was exactly the wrong person to make this movie happen. Yes, he'd just made Mean Streets, which earned critical acclaim. But Mean Streets made almost no money. Scorsese was known as a talented but uncommercial director, an artist, not a moneymaker. He was 31 years old, struggling with drug addiction, and living in a tiny apartment in New York. Even worse, Scorsese and Schrader had a very specific vision. They wanted to shoot in New York City, on location, at night, in the summer heat. This wasn't going to be a controlled soundstage production. This was going to be dangerous, unpredictable, and expensive. Columbia Pictures, which had distribution rights to Mean Streets, passed. Warner Brothers passed. United Artists passed. The project was dead in the water. Again. But then something unexpected happened. 2 things, actually, that changed everything. First, a young actress named Jodie Foster's agent sent her the script. Foster was 12 years old and had been acting since she was 3. She read the role of Iris, the child prostitute, and wanted it desperately. Her mother, Brandy Foster, was hesitant, but trusted her daughter's instincts. Second, and more importantly, Robert De Niro read the script. Robert De Niro had just won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for The Godfather Part 2.
The winner is Robert De Niro in The Godfather Part 2.
He was the hottest young actor in Hollywood, and he wanted to play Travis Bickle. This should have been the moment the film came together. An Oscar-winning star wanting to lead your movie should open every door in Hollywood. But it didn't. Not immediately. Because De Niro came with his own set of problems. He was known as difficult, intense, and uncompromising. He was a method actor who would disappear into roles for months. He didn't care about commercial appeal, he cared about the work. When De Niro got the script, he called Scorsese immediately. They'd worked together on Mean Streets, and they understood each other. De Niro saw Travis Bickle as the role of a lifetime. But the studios saw something else, a difficult actor wanting to play an unsympathetic character in an uncommercial film directed by a risky director. De Niro's involvement actually made some studios more nervous, not less. One executive suggested they offer the role to someone more accessible, like a young Jeff Bridges or even Dustin Hoffman. This standoff lasted months.
Hey.
The project was about to die, again, when a smaller studio called Columbia Pictures came back with an offer. Not because they loved the script, but because they thought De Niro's Oscar win might translate to box office. But there was a catch. Actually, several catches. The budget would be tiny, less than $2 million.
In order to get a green light from the studio, Phillips and Scorsese went forward with what they knew would be an inadequate budget.
They'd have to shoot fast, 40 days or less.
We kept the truth hidden. We made promises. And then we'd go out and shoot something we'd say we were going to drop. Sorry. It wasn't, it's okay. We thought we could do it on the same day. They're just playing a role.
And most importantly, they'd need to cast a name actress opposite De Niro to make it more commercial. Someone audiences knew and loved.
Sue, I need a Sybil Shepherd type. And Sue Menger said, Marty, how about the real thing?
Now we get to the most controversial decision. Casting a 12-year-old girl as a streetwalker. Jodie Foster wanted the role. Her mother approved. But the moment Columbia Pictures found out how central this character was, and how explicit some scenes would be, they panicked. This was 1976. There were no real protections for child actors beyond basic labor laws. The studio's legal team warned that they could face serious backlash, possibly even legal action, for putting a child in these situations. California law required that a welfare worker be on set any time a minor was working. For certain scenes, Foster would need a psychological evaluation. Her mother would need to sign extensive waivers. And most controversially, they'd need to hire an older actress to serve as Foster's body double for any scene that could be considered inappropriate. Foster's older sister Connie, who was 19, agreed to be that double. But even with all these precautions, Columbia remained nervous. They suggested aging up the character, making Iris 16 or 17, and casting an adult actress who could play younger. Scorsese refused. The whole point was that Iris was a child, a victim trapped in a world she didn't fully understand. Making her older would fundamentally change the story. The studio threatened to pull funding. Scorsese threatened to walk. De Niro backed him up. Finally, Columbia agreed, but with conditions. The welfare worker would be on set every day Foster worked. A psychologist would evaluate her before, during, and after filming. Her mother would be present for every scene, and they'd limit her shooting schedule to avoid night shoots whenever possible. July 1975, New York City. A heat wave. The actual production of Taxi Driver was as chaotic and intense as the film itself. They had 40 days to shoot. The budget was $1.9 million, tiny even for 1975. They were shooting on real New York streets at night in the middle of summer. The temperature regularly hit 100 degrees. The smell of garbage was overwhelming. Times Square in 1975 wasn't the tourist destination it is today. It was dangerous, desperate, and real. Scorsese was in the worst physical and mental shape of his life. He was using cocaine heavily, barely sleeping, and pushing himself and everyone around him to the edge. De Niro, meanwhile, had lost 35 pounds for the role. He was driving a real taxi cab between takes. He'd completely disappeared into Travis Bickle, and according to crew members, he was unsettling to be around. The production faced constant problems. They were shooting mostly at night, which meant the crew was essentially nocturnal for 6 weeks. And then there was the violence.
Stuck on this.
The climactic shootout, the rescue of Iris, was so graphic, so brutal, so uncompromising that the studio executives who visited the set were horrified. Columbia sent word, tone it down or expect an X rating. Scorsese refused. This was the whole point of the film. This wasn't supposed to feel good. It was supposed to be disturbing.
It's the way the story resolved itself, in great violence. That's the character.
The standoff continued throughout production. When filming wrapped, Scorsese had created something unprecedented. A film where the audience couldn't tell if the ending was real or a dying man's fantasy. Travis survives. He's hailed as a hero. Betsy seems interested in him again. Everything works out. Except it doesn't feel right. It feels like a dream. Like the fantasy of someone bleeding out in a hallway. The studio hated it. They wanted clarity. They wanted to know if Travis lived or died. They wanted to know if he was a hero or a villain. They wanted answers. Scorsese and Schrader gave them ambiguity instead. Test audiences were divided. Some loved it. Others found it confusing or unsatisfying. Columbia's marketing department had no idea how to sell this film. And then came the MPAA rating. X. The violence was too extreme. Scorsese made a brilliant decision. Instead of cutting the violence, he desaturated the color in the final shootout. He made the blood less bright. The violence remained, but it looked slightly less graphic. The MPAA accepted this compromise and gave it an R rating. But even with an R, Columbia didn't know what to do with Taxi Driver. They gave it a limited release, just a few theaters in February 1976. They expected it to die quickly. Instead, something unexpected happened. Critics fell in love with it. Audiences came back multiple times. Word of mouth spread. The film that should never have been made was becoming a phenomenon. At every single step, Taxi Driver should have died. The fact that it exists, that you can watch it right now, is the result of a handful of people refusing to compromise, refusing to make it easier, refusing to make it safer. Sometimes the greatest art comes from fighting for something impossible. Sometimes the films that change everything are the ones that almost never happen. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Taxi Driver's impossible journey, hit that like button and subscribe for more film history you won't find anywhere else. I've got videos on improvised lines that became iconic, performances too good for the Academy, and more stories about films that almost never happened. Drop a comment below with the movie you want me to cover next. Thanks for watching.